We advise the opinions and views of the hosts and guests do not reflect those of the station.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Philippines Uncut. I'm your host, Buddy Cunanan. Now, in this show, we talk about everything under the sun, and tonight's show is about climate change. Now, before we start the show, I want to greet everyone. I'm very happy New Year, and to welcome you all to the first episode of Philippines Uncut for 2013. And as this is the beginning of the year, we would like to feature climate change, as this is a very important topic for us all. We've observed how crazy the world's weather has become. In fact, last year, 2012, the Philippines was hit by several very powerful storms, and just before Christmas, Typhoon or Tropical Storm Pablo pummeled Mindanao and resulted in over 1,000 people dead and over 800 people missing and billions lost in economic resources and private property. Now, to join us on tonight's show to talk about climate change is one of the leading experts on climate change in the Philippines. He's none other than former Senator Gerardo Alvarez, who is the Commissioner of the Climate Change Commission. Good evening, Senator Alvarez. Welcome to Philippines Uncut.
Well, maraming salamat. Thank you very much for being part of your show.
Oh, actually po, matagal na ko kung kayong gustong imbitahin dito, pero napaka-busy nyo. You're so busy ho. You're always running around the town, and you just came back from Doha. I mean, where you stayed for 2 weeks for the Doha
speeches on climate change.
Yes, the climate change talks. So very busy man, sir.
Well, we're having another storm in Mindanao. That's why we cannot really avoid these disastrous consequences of climate change. We cannot avoid talking about it. And ultimately, because of this conversation, we'll be a little prepared for it, the disasters that happen.
Yes.
And this is what the government is doing. It's preparing the whole country. We have made laws, risk reduction laws. We're buying instruments in order to be able to predict the conditions of the velocity of the wind, the content of water that will be suddenly discharged. Water that is discharged for 3 months is released in 6 hours in one given community. Kaya
yes, sir. Yes, sir. Very tragic. Let's talk about your background muna po with your involvement in the environment and climate change. As I understand, you've been involved in this for a very long time. How did you start with this advocacy?
I chose to be chairman of the Committee on Environment and Natural Resources. I was a senior senator. I could have chosen a bigger committee.
What year was this po?
Yeah, but I chose 1987.
87,
when I first
okay.
became senator.
Opo.
So I was chairman for 10 years of the Committee on Environment. And if I may say so, I made all the initiatives that had anything to do with the protection of the environment. My first initiative was removing lead from our fuel system. And I negotiated for about 4 years with the different oil companies. Pagkatapos, Clean Air Act, NIPAS, which is the umbrella rule on how to be able to conserve our forest.
Yes.
And then waste management system, anything that had to do with protecting the environment, advancing the environment, and anticipating the disastrous consequences of climate change, because we were the first to call for a conference on climate change here in Asia.
Yes, yeah.
They say it may have been the first in the world because the first conference was in 94 in Berlin, and we called our share in February of 94, before Berlin happened in December.
Opo, opo, opo. So, when people load up their their cars with gasoline now, and they see unleaded gas now in the pumps, they have you to thank for this. Well, why is lead so bad for the environment, Senator Alvarez?
Kasi that lead
Yes.
is not only disastrous to the environment, it's disastrous to humans. It brings down the IQ of children. There was already a study in Mexico that the IQ of children had gone down by about 5 points because of their excessive exposure to lead. And then, of course, it's also carcinogenic.
Okay.
Nalalanghap mo yun, it gets into
Cancerous.
your system, yeah, it causes cancer. Oh. And lead, while it makes the combustion system a little more efficient, there are substitutes which are not as disastrous. It was expensive because if you are going to refine gasoline and without lead, they'll have to use more energy for doing that. But
Yes,
it was
yes.
a price well worth paying in order to be able to improve, the quality of life
Yes.
in a modern community. We negotiated for 3 years. I negotiated with them, and ultimately, when we were able to drive home the argument, they were prepared to sit down and sign with us an agreement that they will remove 50% on the first year, and on February 14, because I asked for Valentine's Day, they will have complete lead-free all over the country. That was important because we wanted the people, the government, and the lead companies to understand that what they're using as a fuel, as a beneficial instrument for progress, was actually destructive
Yes.
to humanity, destructive to us people and young people especially.
Yes. Now, sir, you mentioned that in 1987, when you first became senator, you chose the committee, the committee on the environment in the Senate, the upper house. Now, was this okay? Let's be very frank. Was this committee desired committee? Would a lot of people want this
Well,
committee?
Nobody wanted that because the budget for that was only 25,000 per annum.
Yes, sir.
Oh,
25
25
million,
per annum,
yes.
yeah.
Yes.
And a big committee, a senior committee is 250. Kaya maliit.
Malit
I
talaga
had
yung
to
budget.
deliver many speeches to convince my colleague that it deserved a bigger budgeting. And after a year, about a year and a half, they finally made it into a major regular committee.
Yes, sir. And you
And then I was able to put out legislation after legislation on environment.
and when you took over, I mean, when you assumed the chairmanship of this committee, there was no Department of Energy yet in 1987.
Wala rin. Yeah, we had to make that also during
Yes.
the time of, I filed the law during the time of Cory, but it was during the time of President Ramos that we finally succeeded in putting out the department.
Yes, sir. Well, Senator Alvarez, clearly you've been involved in this whole climate change issue, environment issue for a long time, long before it became sexy, long before it became an in thing. You know, I mean, what led you to this advocacy at a time when so many people, so few people were actually really paying attention to climate change?
Well, I'm from Cagayan Valley. You know, Cagayan Valley is a disaster-prone area. We have typhoons there. And then when I was in exile, I was working on human rights. There were groups who were already focusing their science study on climate change. And the scanty evidence, or the evidence that was coming out but convincing, was already taken very seriously by a group that was also engaged in human rights. They were saying that in no less than 100 years, they were talking of 100 years, the disaster to the environment and the consequences of climate change may be as irremediable as a nuclear holocaust. So I would join them after discussions on human rights. Naintindihan ko yan, dahan-dahan. Then the melting of the glaciers was getting known because I was in New York. I was heading the lobby against the martial law regime, and there were many human rights groups there
Yes.
with whom I worked. This was one of the issues we were working on, climate change. So when I got here, I was a senior senator, mataas ng konti ranking ko. I had the option to pick up the committee that I wanted. And they were pleasantly surprised when I chose environment, tapos energy, and then that's it. We went into forest questions, we went into garbage question. And of course, the more important thing that I really tackled was the negotiation to remove lead.
Yes.
I was beginning to focus on carbon dioxide.
Yes. And I understand you also founded a group called the Earth Savers. Now, this Earth Savers, I'm holding in the manual, it says an Earth Savers manual. And it says Earth Savers movement. What is this about, Senator Alvarez? What is this Earth Savers group?
Well, this is meant to organize young people to make them understand that the environment is our life support system. And we must keep it healthy, we must keep it sustainable, vigorous, so it supports life. But the environment is being threatened because it's being abused. Yung tawagin nating carbon footprint was getting heavier. Carbon footprint on water, carbon footprint on forest, carbon footprint on the use of fiber, and many of the essential things that we need for survival.
Define, sir, what a carbon footprint is for our lay people watching the show now. What is a carbon footprint exactly?
A carbon footprint is the overuse of carbon. For instance, what is the first problem, the most crucial problem of climate change? Because we are burning fossil fuel. This is like coal, which we dig under the ground, or
yes,
oil, which we process, nire-refine natin, naging gasolina,
diesel.
naging diesel. Oh. And when you burn this, they release carbon. And carbon stays in the atmosphere for 100 years. So that since the Industrial Revolution, when we started to use machines, feeding them with carbon, we've been accumulating carbons there. The carbons of our grandfathers are still there. We're adding on to them. And when we became more active in mass production of anything that we use,
Of course.
we thicken the carbon. Because the carbon is so thick, and the carbon holds the escape or blocks the escape of a spectrum.
Yes.
Kasi maraming spectrum yung sikat ng araw.
Yes.
There is a white band, and then there's a short band, which is the red spectrum kung tawagin.
Yes.
It's being held up by this carbon. It can't escape.
Warming
And
the planet.
Yeah,
It warms
warming the planet.
Yes.
But many people believe that the planet was so vast, so great, it can't be warmed. They're proven wrong.
Yes.
Because when we called for a conference here in '94, that was already the shared idea of many of the scientists, including Chinese scientists who participated,
Yes.
na umiinit na ang daigdig.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
At karbon ang dahilan.
Yes.
Ngunit, how can 36 countries make this a palpable and a convincing scientific argument? 13 years later, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, which continued to gather the evidence, came out with the conclusion that carbon is the culprit, kaya mag-iinit ang daigdig at umiinit na nga ang daigdig.
And yet, sir, there are some people, not a few people in society, especially in the United States, who don't believe that climate change is real. Diba? Even the former President George Bush was one of the famous people who actually said.
We were having a conference here, and we invited
Yes.
many of their NGOs, like
Yes.
the Climate Institute, which is a very powerful, influential NGO in the United States. And the American president said it was a hoax.
Climate change is a hoax.
Yes, it was a hoax. Because he was from a state, Texas,
Yes.
whose economic vitality,
Depends on fossil fuels.
fossil fuel, o
Yes.
kaya yan. And of course, there were scientists who thought that, honestly believe, that the carbon which had been accumulated there have been recycled.
Yes,
And
yes.
they do not really pose the danger that the earth is so vast, it can recycle these things like a great organism. It
Yes,
can
yeah.
consume what
Yes.
endangers it. But when the evidence came out, the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change got the attention of the whole scientific world. And the following year, it won the Nobel Prize. So that's not the thinking.
Accepted,
It's the
yes.
respected idea on the threat, the greatest threat so far
Yes.
to the life of the Earth.
Yes.
Because the tipping point is 2 degrees. We are now 1.4 degrees centigrade.
What do you mean by
Konti na lang.
tipping point, Senator Alvarez?
If we should reach that point, then our life support system, the life on Earth, which gives us life,
Yes,
human
yes.
beings. Halimbawa, mabot tayo ng 2 degrees centigrade.
Increase
So,
in
2
the
degrees
average
centigrade.
temperature.
Yeah, average temperature.
Okay.
These oceans will warm up. And of course, the fish life will be threatened, especially the plankton which feeds the fish.
Which feeds the
Will
fish.
die, and if the
Yes.
fish will die,
Yes.
we're going to have brain damage. Lalo na tayo, puro fish protein ang pinanggagalingan ng pagkain natin. No?
And it's happening already now. We can see vast coral fields that are now becoming bleached. They're
Yeah.
turning white because because of they're being suffocated.
Yes.
At namamatay yung coral beds.
Yes. These coral beds are the nurseries in the ocean.
Yes, yeah.
And when they get bleached, they expel the planktons that feed the small fish. And if there's no small fish, there's no big fish.
There's no big fish. no big fish.
No tuna, not only for us, but the Japanese as well. Oh.
Yes. Sir, let's talk about the Philippine situation. Should we be concerned here? How vulnerable is the Philippines to climate
According
change?
to the United Nations, we are the third most vulnerable country. Yeah, third most vulnerable
Wow.
in the
Ano po
world.
yung, which
Yung
are the
isa,
first two?
Tonga, which is being evacuated slowly now.
Okay.
And isa, Vanuatu. They're all in the Asia-Pacific
So,
region.
Tonga, Vanuatu, and then Philippines.
Philippines.
Wow.
Pero I question the way they have classified us because 1,700 islands. Eh sila,
Tonga
isla lang
and
yan.
Vanuatu are so
Tonga is
small,
only
yes.
about 100,000.
Yes.
Vanuatu is close to it. So how could 100,000 be compared to about 100 million?
Yes.
We're 90 million.
Ano yung rationale? What was the rationale for
Well,
this?
we're most vulnerable because we're an archipelago.
Okay.
Marami tayong coastal areas. Yung coastal zone natin yan is a point of vulnerability because the ocean surge, yung bagyo.
Okay.
Mas mahaba pa yung coastal zone natin kaysa sa America, which is a continent. We're about 36 or 37,000 kilometers long.
Yes, yes.
Pagkatapos, yung bodies of water, bodies of land natin,
Yes.
our thin land of masses of land, katulad ng Luzon, they're bifurcated by river basins, malalaking ilog.
Okay. So what is the effect of that
Eh,
po?
Pag ang lalaki ng ilog mo at saka binagsakan ka ng tuni-tunilada at milyong-milyon tunilada na ngayon na tubig, papatayin kayo ng ilog sapagkat sasabog yung ilog na yan.
The
oh.
rivers will be will surge, of course.
That's why we're losing lives every time we have floods. So. And the sources of our energy, ang Buklao, Binga, Angat, are all threatened.
Wow.
Kaya they thought we were most vulnerable because the dangers were as terrible as the dangers in this small community. But when we were having a conference, because we had a conference yung, in Doha, we had a tripartite South-South dialogue with Kenya, with Colombia, in order to share common experiences. And I gave this observation that perhaps it was wrong to compare us with smaller communities because you multiply the danger
Yes,
on the
yes.
size and the number of islands. For
Yes.
instance, Palawan has 100 islands. If the oceans will rise and the islands will be flooded, and they can be flooded when the ocean surge is really strong, the number of people that you have to evacuate is going to be far more numerous than that what we have to evacuate from Tonga or Vanuatu.
And it's happening now. Rising seas are actually posing a threat to these small island nations like Palau maybe, or the Maldives.
Yeah, Maldives, they're already preparing to look for evacuation sites.
Imagine that.
In that conference we had, yung risk reduction conference we had with Colombia, Colombia had already planned for one of its San Vicente Island, how to evacuate them systematically to the mainland. Tayo wala pa. We have no plan for evacuation. How are we going to evacuate the people from Pulilio, or the small islands from Tawi-Tawi, Sulu? 1,700 yan eh.
But sir, I have a question for you. You know, a lot of people watching now may dismiss it and say, ay, siguro yung rising seas na yan, siguro 50 years pa yan or 100 years after it will happen. Why do you have to worry about that now? I mean, what do you have to say about people who think that way? That, this is still a long way off before these islands will be submerged under the sea by rising seas. I mean, what do you have to say about that?
That's the frightening thing, because this can really be not completely averted, but almost anticipated, if the nations of the world can agree on the volume of carbon dioxide that they'll cut. We had an agreement, the Kyoto Protocol, which assigns the volume of carbon dioxide
To
that
1990
in
levels.
developed countries, yes,
Yes.
to certain level, which will not threaten the vast portion of humanity. We've been meeting for the last so many times in Doha. This was the 18th meeting. We were supposed to do some ambitious plans already on how much to cut in the carbon dioxide volume in the atmosphere.
Yes, sir.
And the big nations would be able to do that. But we have not.
But
We
sir-
just kept alive the Kyoto Protocol and promised ourselves that in the coming 3 years we'll have the rules on how to cut it. And the coming from 2005 to 2020, another 5 years, we will implement it.
Let's go to the Kyoto Protocol. I mean, to sign in 1997 and bringing emissions down to 1990 levels. But, you know, isn't it a bit frustrating, or don't you think this is an exercise in futility, given that the United States, the biggest carbon emission, you know, the biggest greenhouse gas producer and user, has refused to ratify the Kyoto Protocol.
Yeah.
So
You
I mean,
know.
small guys like us, I mean, what chance do we have
You
achieving
and I,
anything?
you and I per capita produce
Yes.
about 1.5 tons of carbon a year.
And the Americans,
Americans siguro mga 12 o 17.
look at that.
O
With their
tons,
big,
oh.
with their big SUVs. And their, no,
Ayun, sabi ng Amerikano,
lahat sila may
Kanya-
kotse. Oh.
China should also participate. India
Yes.
should participate. The Chinese produce per capita 6 tons per capita. Pero there are 1.2 billion of them. Kaya ang laki. Kaya even if we agree on this, sabi niya, if you don't participate in the agreement, meron yung provision doon common but differentiated. Your responsibility to cut should be differentiated
Yes.
on your volume of discharge, on your responsibility with the accumulation of these gases. Ngayon, medyo nagkakaayos ng konti sapagkat sabi ng China nung araw, no, you cannot make the cut because I'm still a poor country. True, China compared to the United States is still poor. And they should be the developed countries. But they're throwing the biggest volume of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere because of their number and
Yes.
because of their dynamic development.
Yes. I heard that the Chinese are building one coal-fired plant a week.
100,000 per month. 100,000
Per month.
Megawatt.
Yes, yes.
Yung laki.
Yes, yes.
Oo. But to the credit of the Chinese, they've been planting about 4 million hectares of deforested area. And they are one of the biggest builders of solar
Yes, yes.
and wind energy.
Yes, yes.
But, of course, when they're negotiating, these great nations are negotiating, they're not thinking of the survival of the world, much less how to be able to spare us from the early destructive danger of the consequences of climate change. Sapagkat nag-negotiate pa sila, humahampas na yung malalaking bagyo eh.
Yes, yes.
Malulunod na tayo katulad ng Maldives, a small island. It's a very, very clear example. In so many years, if there's nothing is done, in 10 years, Maldives is going to be under the sea.
Is that a realistic prediction? Huh? In 10 years, if nothing is done and the ratings are going, Maldives
as a matter
will...
of fact, they say in 5 years.
Jeez.
But in the Philippines, how many Maldives do we have? We have 1,700 islands. So.
Ayan. Sir, hold that thought because I want to talk about the Philippine response to climate change when Philippines Uncut returns.
Be advised, the opinions and views of the hosts and guests do not reflect those of the station.
ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Philippines Uncut. I'm your host, Buddy Kunanan. Now, in this show, we talk about everything under the sun, and tonight's show is about climate change. Now, before we start the show, I want to greet everyone a very happy new year and to welcome you all to the first episode of Philippines Uncut for 2013. And as this is the beginning of the year, we would like to feature climate change as this is a very important topic for us all. We've observed how crazy the world's weather has become. In fact, last year, 2012, the Philippines was hit by several...